Thank you. So nice to see so many familiar faces. So I have a design task for you. I want you to imagine the following scenario and help me figure out how to solve the problem. So you are tasked with designing an optimal learning environment for 50 individuals who have various responsibilities over professional development in their school and the district. You're trying to figure out how to help them be more proficient in developing the professional practice of their colleagues inside their school and throughout the district. How would you design professional development for them? So let me capture this again. And if you don't get what I'm doing, there are 50 of you in the room. This is the challenge I face. I want you to think about it a little bit. I actually want you to think about it. So individually reflect on, if you had the ability to wave a magic wand and design the optimal learning environment for someone who is going to, in just a few short weeks, have to lead professional development for teachers and paras and others throughout the district so that their practice actually improves. Not just that you lead training, but in fact you develop their professional practice. How would you design it? How would you design your own professional development? So take a minute just to think on that. What would be the core components of it? So if you would not mind, turn to a colleague. Talk about what you wrote down, what are you thinking? How will you create the ideal learning environment for professional developers who are going to be tasked with developing the practice of colleagues very shortly? So this is the problem we face right now. This is case in point teaching. We are actually facing, in talking about the design of the next 2 days, we face the very challenge that you guys are going to face in a few weeks, which is leading professional development around some significant content area for some significant category of professionals within Grand Rapids Public Schools, and how to do it well and not just do it. I want to hear a little bit of your thoughts just to get us started, but before we do that, let's talk about what we're actually going to accomplish over the next couple of days and a couple of logistical things. First logistical thing, if you happen to look toward the back of the room, you might notice something unusual. We've got candid camera here, and really we're just punking all of you. This is some elaborate ruse, and somebody's about to get married, and we'll explain all that later. Mary Jo asked if I wouldn't mind tonight being videotaped for folks who couldn't be in the room, and I said sure. She has to promise to make me look thinner and younger, but that's what her obligation to this is. The camera's going to be focused on me, so you don't have to worry about yourselves in that. We're just trying to focus mostly on that and on me. So hopefully if you feel any anxiety about that, you'll let us know, but it should be relatively low stakes for you, incredibly high stakes for me. And if I don't like it, I guess we'll just destroy the tape afterwards. So objectives for the next couple of days. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, Mary Jo might have different objectives that we need to talk about. You guys probably have expectations about objectives, but let's be really clear about what I think we will be able to accomplish in 2 days of half-day sessions. I'm trying to raise your knowledge level around some of the best, most current research on how professionals learn best how to do their work. And it doesn't just come from schools, it comes from all sectors of professional life. Some of it's drawn from the medical profession, some of it's drawn from the legal profession, some of it's drawn from business and other nonprofit sectors. And I think that the research is actually coalescing around a few key ideas. And you will, I'm assuming, not think that they're very radical. But my hunch is you'll also not experience it as what we call professional development in public schools on the whole. So that's going to pose a challenge to us. How do we think about that? Second, I'm going to create lots of opportunity over both days, not just tomorrow, over the 2 days, for you to actually think about how to design professional development experiences aligned with what we know about how people learn. I have a limitation in that I'm not here to watch you deliver. I'm not here to coach you individually. So the best I can do is try to set up some conditions within which we do some of the planning for that work, which is going to happen later. And you'll have the opportunity, hopefully, to get some feedback on that work and to see how it moves you along. My hunch is that some of you are clearer about what you're going to have to do as a professional developer, and some of you are less clear about the learning you're supposed to engender in other people. So we're going to have to be flexible in how we work through all of this together. And then the last one, which I think is a critical one, is to be quite conscious and develop the skills of recognizing the learning dilemmas in the professional development conditions that are going to be handed to you, because they will, I can guarantee you right now, they won't be optimal. And how do you mitigate against those challenges that can get in the way of professional learning, and do your best to align the situation with what we know about professional learning. So let me ask a favor of everyone. Could you make a de facto name tent? And if you just take a sheet of paper, fold it, and try. I would so much rather know your names than refer to you as "Hey you." Here's a thicker pen coming your way. Thank you. This was the second design challenge, right? You know, first one was thinking about the professional development. The second one is how do you build a name tent? So some other foundational work as we move forward. If this were a long-term professional learning community that I was going to be a part of beyond just a couple of 3-hour sessions, I would spend a lot of time norming with folks and building very explicit norms around what does it mean to be in a professional learning community. But I'm going to, just for lack of time, I'm going to jump past that norming time that I would spend and simply suggest some very modest norms. And I think you'll find they're rather modest and they're few, but some of them might be kind of heady. So first norm that I'm inviting you to take hold of is make this work for you. Now, what in the world does that mean? From my vantage point, that means you have to be an active participant in this around what your needs are as a professional learner and the leader of other professional learning, which is asking questions about your particular context. It's about identifying ways in which it's not meeting their needs, and it's about actively adapting ideas and constructs in real time to, well, here's how it applies to me. And some of that work I'm going to create opportunities for. We're going to say, okay, think about how this is going to apply to your work and do some work around that. But sometimes I just want you to actively think about that. So this has to work for you. If you sit passively and just entertain the idea that it doesn't apply to you and do no work of connecting the dots, that's not going to create a great learning environment for you. It's not going to create a great learning environment for the other colleagues who are going to be leaning on you. Second norm, play hard. Be present and really in this thing. The best that I can do is bring you into some ideas and invite you into some thinking and some work. But if you passively engage it, it's going to be hard for us to extract as much as we need to in a few short hours. And lastly, support the learning of your colleagues. Some of you show up to these professional development sessions as if it's a conference that you can individually zone in and out of, and you can occasionally check your email, or you can occasionally think about creating your shopping to-do list for tonight. And I'm not passing judgment. It happens. Our brains wander. But this isn't about you. This is about the kids of Grand Rapids. And it's about you supporting your colleagues so that as a community you have a real shot at improving the lives and the learning outcomes of your kids. So 3 rather simple norms they're inviting you into. Make it work for you, play hard, and support the learning of your buddies. So, what did you come up with earlier? And I remember our conversation back a few weeks ago. What did you guys, I don't know who you were talking with, what did you think about what would make for kind of ideal professional, if you had to design what we're up to today, how would you design it?
One thing that keeps coming up is differentiating the professional development. And that could include choices, having some choice.
So can you give me the why behind that?
Because not everyone needs the same thing. And people are entering professional development with a range of prior knowledge and skill sets and experience.
Okay. So what might that look like? This would be called sustained inquiry with the student, right? So I'm not just walking away from the first question. And help me, what might that look like in a professional learning situation?
Offering 3 different options, a choice menu.
Okay. So in room A, somebody's going to be leading professional learning on helping kids decode. In room B, we're going to be doing this. In room C, you determine which one best meets your needs. Possibly. Any other options? I mean, you said choice might be one way of differentiating. Do you have other thoughts?
Ideally, you would survey and know who your audience is and design the key based on who your audience is and what their needs are.
What if your audience doesn't know what they need? Well, this is a classic problem of practice, right? We can ask the people in our buildings, what do you want? You might not get identified what they need.
Then based on some parameters and choice.
Okay. So
That you've established.
okay. Guided parameters, kind of. Okay. Okay.
I'd like to add to what Ann said, because you have to really think about different learning styles of adults.
Mm-hmm.
If they're visual learners or auditory learners, and so you have to keep that in mind when you present something.
Why does that matter?
Because we might be, if you're always just talking to us, I mean, we're just listening to you and we're not hands-on tactile,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to lose us.
Okay. So what if I do an interpretive dance, 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have everybody make clay and Play-Doh drawings later? I'm being playful here, but I think that as much as I actually believe that we have different styles and entry points into stuff, there's actually a fairly incomplete database around whether learning styles produce the most optimal learning. There's a lot of research that suggests that we have different orientations to the world and different ways of reacting to content and different ways of engaging people. We have introverts and extroverts. We have people who are more auditory and more visual. But the research on how people learn, the process through which people come to take external information and skills and code it into short-term memory and code it into long-term memory is kind of quiet on learning styles. So it may be important. I'm not suggesting it's not, but it might be a necessary but not sufficient thing. So, gentlemen in the back, one of you guys, what did you guys talk about? Well, how would you design this for us? Does this mean learning objectives? What do you mean by this?
What PD that when you think about the kids, how can we take the PD that we're giving the staff and make sure that as a group, as a unit, that we, the students, if you are in different sectors, for instance, when we do PD, maybe you do break it down in different groups, but at the end, still focusing on the bigger picture.
So I'm going to stay with this just because I want to make sure I understand. So let me check my own understanding by feeding back what I think you might be saying, and you correct me. I could divide 50 people up into 50 different wants that they have for professional learning. But if those don't line with what the whole district needs to do as a collective in order to move the ball, that it might not actually get us where we need to go. Is that kind of what you're going towards? Okay, fantastic. It has to cohere. There has to be a bigger organizational aim behind it. Ryan, you're looking down. That means that's the kind of person I like to call on. This is called a cold call. Ryan, help us out. I'm going to make this as painless as possible. Add something to this. Either elaborate on one of these three ideas that's come up or give us something new that you guys talked about.
Well, we talked about playing in the mind. How are you going to get to the end? What are you going to do? How are you going to learn it?
So say more. I'm not sure I'm following.
What activities? How are you going to get to the end? What path are you going to take to get to the end goal? What are you going to do?
What activities to engage?
So what activities will you design?
Making sure it's interactive.
Okay, so you've got qualities here. So
I would add resources as well. What resources would you use?
what resources do you need? I'm asking you. So what?
Oh, what specifically do I
Yeah,
need?
what do you need?
I need the resources that match the intended learning so that the people who are in the audience have the nitty-gritty, I don't want to say binder, but
Mm-hmm.
the evidence of what it is I'm trying to communicate.
Okay. Did anybody in your conversations think about the basic delivery model? I mean, would you guys design 2 late afternoon, 3.5-hour chunks of time as the optimal learning environment?
That's one of the things that I wrote. The communication, the way the information is presented in group interaction as a presenter, you've got to be able to read your audience.
Mhm.
And with, I think kind of what she was saying with learning styles is, when you are presenting, you have to make sure you, just like when we're in a classroom, we know you got about X amount of minutes of attention here, and then you need to shift and do something else, and then give it 2 minutes, and then just shift again, because you never want to lose your group. And if you see yourself losing your group, you don't just keep trudging on, you got to change something.
Well, you're going to hate the next 6 hours. I'm going to lecture at you slowly and painfully.
Hey, I'm just numb right now. So.
We were going to try to make it as interactive as possible. But I want to go back to this idea of kind of the design of this. And it's not taking a shot at Mary Jo or this. This is kind of the optimal environment we could create to cover some research which is just foundational to do the real work. The research is actually really clear here. If you look at experts in their field, the top 1% doctors, top 1% lawyers, top 1% teachers, top 1% principals, top 1% superintendents, they do not come to be in the top 1% because of coursework. It does not explain their proficiency of practice in the least. What makes them proficient is experience and a lot of things wrapped around it. What that means is the way you learn this stuff is actually doing the stuff. But doing it in and of itself doesn't produce the learning. It's doing with a lot wrapped around it. And if we were designing, I think, the most optimal situation, this would be a very short snippet about making you lead professional learning. And if I had maybe 5 or 6 sessions, every one of you would have to lead a 3-hour session with a small group. And every one of you would have videotape of you leading a small group that you had to critique in front of your colleagues watching it back as the practitioner. Each one of you would have to set your own individual learning goals relative to what you're going to learn coming out of here. Each one of you would have to already know exactly what you're going to be leading 2 weeks from now so that you could spend time prepping and preparing for that and getting lots of feedback in preparation. Each one of you would get a lot of coaching and support during the delivery of professional development. Each one of you would have someone along your side watching it and giving you critiqued feedback afterwards, and then you'd have to do it again within a week. That's more aligned with what we know about what makes gifted practitioners. You know, I can't teach you how to play tennis sitting around a table and saying, okay, you're going to hold the racket. When you eventually get to hold a racket, hold it in your hand like you're shaking hands with the racket and swing it. You know, I'm not going to make you a proficient tennis player that way. So we are somewhat up against a wall, right? This is not the most optimal if I was teaching you how to do this in an incredibly proficient way. What I can do, as it said in the objectives, is try to get you engaged in some of the best knowledge about how to do it and try to create the conditions in which you have to extrapolate that into your planning and then give you some opportunity to do some planning, get some feedback. So that's all my way of just lowering your expectations for the next 2 days, right? It's just getting clear. But I wanted just to really calibrate. What can you do? And it actually is an honest conversation about the realities of this. So, got a quote for you. This is bad practice because there's a lot of text on a slide. But you have a copy of it. And I'm going to ask you to all read this because I think you're old enough and mature enough that I don't need to read it to you. So I don't put this in front of you to make you want to slit your wrists now and give up. I'm putting this in front of you to make us think really long and hard about what our efficacy is in leading these professional developments. Again, not to make us depressed, but to be brutally honest with what do you really get out of these sessions. And to challenge us as a group. If you're really rethinking professional development, if this is the opportunity where the district has to fundamentally flip the paradigm of professional development, how do you get past professional development through training, classroom, workshops, to professional development that's based on a bigger picture of how adults learn? So let's get to a picture of how adults learn. I am going to steal heavily from a gifted set of adult learning and professional learning experts at the University of Connecticut and elsewhere now, and they've spread out and they've written quite a bit about this. And they, over decades of research and pulling together decades of other people's research, came up with this kind of crystallized framework. And it has 3 fundamental components, thus the creative name, the TRIO model. The way this is going to work is that I'm going to try covering as fast as possible. Think mini lessons, some key components of the research for each of these domains of work. And then I'm going to put you to work on thinking about how would you design your professional development. What would the conditions of your professional development look like if it aligned to this? So there's going to be a rhythm over the next 2 days about this. You're going to have in front of you you have the handouts, but you also have a planning document. And I'm going to give you another copy of that planning document tomorrow, and we can get you the digital copy of that planning document so that you have that as a way of actually taking an artifact out of today and tomorrow and putting it to work and hopefully have some practical application of all of this. So find that planning document right now. If you don't have it, let me know, and you're too shy over here. To the best of your knowledge, and it might be that some of you have no clue what you're going to be doing in a couple of weeks. To the best of your knowledge right now, jot down what you think the objectives are of the professional development that you're going to be leading in the near future. If you're not clear about specific workshops that you're leading, think generally. What is in the scope of responsibility? What are you trying to pull off? You can throw those in at the very top. If you need more room, move to the margins. But what are the objectives that you have in leading that professional learning? So a number of you are still writing. A number of you are looking to your cheat sheets from today. Some of you are trying to recall what you came up with. A couple of criteria I want to introduce to you around these. I just want to make it very simple. I could give you long, elaborated criteria for having good objectives, but I just want you to think of 2. Make it really simple. Are they behavioral, and are they failable? The answer should be yes. Okay. Behavioral means, does it actually say what people are going to be able to do as a result of being there? So this is the real challenge of professional development, right? Most of us would love to write, participants will understand X. Dot. And that might be critical, right? That might be an important objective in yours. Your next objective should somehow articulate, and what are they going to be able to do as a result of it? Because there's not a lot of compelling evidence that simply suggests putting a lot of knowledge, pouring it into people's skulls, dramatically changes their professional practice. That's what we're shooting for here. We're shooting for people to be able to do something better as a result. So if you identified something about understanding, knowing, learning, great. Try to go to the next one, which is, and what are they going to be able to do differently as a result? And not just differently, hopefully better. Second objective, it ought to be failable. Meaning, if you don't know whether you achieved it or not at the end of the session or down the road, it probably wasn't a good objective. We are going to explore literacy. That is not failable. You could basically have one conversation about literacy and say, yeah, we explored it. Check. Think about how you would measure and know whether you accomplished it. Mary Jo and I have worked together for a decade, and the way she and I often think about this is short-term and long-term. Short-term, when people walk out of the door, what evidence will have told us we did our job? We ask ourselves that question when we're doing planning together. At the end of that day, at the end of that session, at the end of the multiple sessions, how will we know we accomplished what we're trying to accomplish? And we're looking for, what are the indicators? What's the evidence in the room? What are people doing? What are they saying? What are the artifacts we're coming back to it? So how will you know? There also might be some longer terms. Over time might be a longer term picture, a longer term professional development. We're expecting people to be able to do this proficiently and this proficiently as measured by X, Y, and Z. And ultimately, obviously, student learning goes up. Wherever you are with these, treat them as draft and treat them as a jumping off point. Now let's get a little bit into the framework, and we'll keep coming back to this planning document a little bit. So let's jump into one of the domains. Again, what I'm going to try to do as efficiently as possible is to bring you into some research that people have been spending decades working on. And I'm going to try to just boil it down as fast and as rapidly as possible and then put you to work on it. That's where a lot of the action will happen. So the folks who came up with this model suggest that we as adults are fantastic at learning things. We're just really bad students. And that if we'd realized that from the beginning, we'd be all better suited. So here's an example. Bertha May Lassiter is my 93-year-old grandmother. And Bertha May has 2 grandkids who are my kids, great-grandkids who are my kids. And for a decade, we've been trying desperately to get that woman to have a laptop computer in her house. We thought, wouldn't it be great that she'd have access to the world? She lives in this little tiny community in rural North Carolina, and she's living by herself. We wanted to have access to the world. She has a vibrant mind. We want to feed that mind. We also want to be able to communicate with her. Wouldn't it be great to email with us? Grandmother, that'd be great. No interest at all. And what she would say is, I'm too old. You can't teach me that stuff. Computers just confuse me, and I don't want any part of those internets. About a year and a half ago, my daughter Vivian cozied up to my grandmother on the couch and said, Ma Bert, if you had an email address, I would email you daily. In a week, my grandmother had a computer, had taught herself how to access the internet, which she had never been on before, had signed up for an email address with Gmail, and now emails my daughter back and forth. Sometimes we're not great students, but we can be great learners when we want to. And that example is kind of a perfect way of encapsulating a lot of the ideas in this component of key attributes. That there's a lot of stuff that we as individuals bring to the table. Some of which you guys can't control, but some of which you can work on the conditions to influence. So let's talk about what some of those are. So, metacognitive knowledge about what people know and what they need to know is really important in the learning process. So Anne, I'm going to pick on you again. If I put you on the spot, what's something that you think you need to get better at in terms of leading professional learning?
Talking less and encouraging more engagement from participants, especially those that are reluctant.
And how do you know that about yourself?
Engaging in professional development, looking at responses of people and how some people are disengaged and some are very engaged. And how do you get those reluctant participants
Okay.
part of the conversation?
Great. So what Anne is starting to reveal a little bit is some metacognitive knowledge about herself. She's thinking about her own thinking, and she's thinking about where she needs to go. Adults optimize learning when they are regulating themselves and when they are thinking about their thinking. And when you as professional developers can help people step out of the doing occasionally and think about their processing and taking stock of it and regulating, just like we do with good literacy instruction, where we teach kids how to think about their thinking as they're reading a text. This is what we need to do for adults. There's a lot of research supports this is the same way for adults. Another related issue. Adults have a deep need to self-regulate their own learning. It's not just adults, kids do it too, but we never give them the opportunity. And what this means, this is the executive functioning of the brain. I want to get better at X. Here's what I'm going to do to get better at X. Even if they don't do it for me, I'm doing it for myself. and regulating that, and how much better am I getting? A good example of this comes, and you're going to get sick of hearing about Joshua and Vivian, but I just live their learning, and so they're the most vivid examples to me other than academic ones. Vivian took violin starting in kindergarten. She learned with the Suzuki method, was taught in her kindergarten, and she just she had an instrument, she had a bow, and she moved her arms kind of like this. She didn't know a whole lot about what she was doing. It sounded like she was killing cats slowly over long periods of time in the house, and she just did it. And she was told by her teacher, you need to do it 15 minutes a day. So what did she do? 15 minutes. 15 minutes is up. Let's stop. When she entered a new process of learning after we had moved, she got really frustrated because she wasn't moving along, she wasn't developing, she was struggling, and it was becoming quite painful for her. And the reason why is because every day she would come home and she'd spend 15 minutes. She paid no attention to what she was trying to learn or whether she was getting better at it and what she needed to be modifying in her practice in order to get better at it. She just did 15 minutes. At the moment, and there was a moment in October of last year where she went, oh my goodness, maybe I need to do that part again to get that little passage of the song captured. And I just happened to be at home that day where she repeated something to get better at it as opposed to just doing it to fill up the 15 minutes. That was the moment where self-regulation kicked in for her. And she began to thrive in violin afterwards. That little moment totally turned around how she engaged in practice because she wasn't just practicing for practice's sake. She was practicing to get better. So that's what self-regulation is. We have to figure out what people's different orientations to learning are. Why are these adults in the room? One of the things that you guys have to fight against is that for some of you, they're being told they have to be in the room. Number one variable some of you guys are going to face. And let's just put it on the table. You've got to figure out how to solve that problem in your planning. You've got to figure out how to work past that barrier, and you've got to identify other sources of motivation for people. Some of the classic ones in the literature, intrinsic sources of motivation. Fundamentally, people want to be good at what they do. And it is a more powerful driver than external motivators like money, acclaim, awards, though those can be powerful. People want to be good at what they do. And if you can figure out a way to tap into that intrinsic motivation, you might have a shot at it, even overcoming the reality of mandated professional development. And lastly, complexity and accuracy of relevant mental models of work. Let me talk a little bit about this. So, about 6 years ago, a high school in Connecticut called me up and said, we want you to help us think about defining what is high-quality learning and teaching in classrooms. We are very interested in thinking about student engagement as a key lever in classrooms. We've been trying to figure out what it looks like, and we would like you to help us design a learning walk protocol where we can go through the halls and go into classrooms in this high school and gather data about engagement. So day one, I show up and they said, we've already designed the learning walk. So I thought, oh, that's why I was coming. No, we've already designed it. We're going to go through the learning walk. People have a sheet of paper they can do checklists on. It's like, okay. So we walked in, and I was just floored by how absolutely boring this high school was and how I would have just been the most awful and belligerent student if I had ever been forced to be in that school. And the people who had done the learning walk were just absolutely blown away with how engaged the kids were. And I didn't, did you not see the same thing I saw? And we talked and we talked, and what I realized is that people's mental model, the people leading it, was a very different definition of engagement than I had. What their definition of engagement was is the kids were compliant, right? Kids sat there and they nodded occasionally, even if they weren't paying attention. They did it just out of, I'll play this game with you, teacher. Just don't call on me. Occasionally an eyebrow went up. They'd look on their paper and pretend like they're writing down. And I was sitting there going, there's no cognitive engagement in the exercises, at least very little. And their mental model of engagement was so focused on discipline and order and compliance that they saw wonderful things. And mine was so different that I saw very abysmal things. So the real lesson of this is the mental models people bring into the room will have a big impact on the work you try to do. Uncovering their mental models, helping them own their mental models, and helping them realize that sometimes their mental models are getting in the way of them having a deeper understanding of what you're trying to help them learn. Because sometimes they have misunderstandings embedded within that. Okay, let's do some work. Richard has chatted long enough and told stories of Vivian and Joshua long enough. And here's where the real action happens. Go back to those objectives you wrote down. You can write on this planning document, but I would guess, for most of you, just having some other sheet of paper to start answering these questions or even writing on the handouts is going to be most optimal. What I want you to be thinking about, big picture, is how might you design the workshops that you are going to be responsible for in a way that helps them align with what we know about individual attributes of learners. So, what am I going to do to help people think about their own thinking? That's a question. How am I going to help people own their own learning and regulate whether they're learning? How am I going to help people tap into their own sources of motivation and actually move past some distractors of motivation? How might I surface their mental models and even complexify and nuance their mental models? That's basically what I'm asking. And what I want to do here is create in the room about 6 or 7 minutes of absolute silence. And I want it to be sacred silence. I don't want us to get distracted and start, you're like, God, what do you think about this? No, it's just, this is your own processing time to start getting into this, to write down ideas, to start thinking about the design of your workshop. I promise you, you're going to have the opportunity to share and think about this with some of your colleagues. But first, I need you to do some individual work relative to the objectives you're trying to pull off. So, before you get started, I'm going to pull this old trick out of the book. Malika, can you repeat back to me what you think the task is at hand?
Yes, you asked for us to spend 6 or 7 silent minutes reflecting on the objectives that we wrote a few minutes ago through the lens of the individual attributes on the previous slide, and specifically ask ourselves, how do we help people do each of those 4 things?
Yeah. And I would say that what I would add to that is within the context of what you're trying to pull off. Like, how would you actually design time, space, content, process, experience that lets you tap into what we know about how people bring their individual selves to the learning environment? So raise your hand if you agree with Malika's accounting of what our task is. Raise your hand if you think she missed the mark. Raise your hand if you don't really care, you just want to get started because you were hungry to work on it. I won't answer you to raise your hands. Get started. I'm going to have a timer on. I want you, if you need any help, call me over, but I'm going to be wandering around looking over your shoulder if you don't mind. So I will answer the question that comes up every time I do something with that. No one will hear what I've said of substance for the entire day, but they'll say, where can I get that timer tools thing? It's called timer tools. You go on the internet and you can do a Google search for timer tools, one word together, and it's an entire platform of various timing applications that you can have on your computer and use in various different ways, and it is a nice visual cue to people when you have to move things along quickly. So what we're going to do now is to disrupt the isolation that we often have in planning some of this work and create the opportunity to just get some brilliant ideas on the table in as fast a possible way. So this is going to be a version of speed dating that we're going to engage in right now. In a few short minutes, I'm going to ask you to find 2 colleagues to work with. They can be people sitting next to you, and they can be people across the room. I'll talk about that process later. But once you're with your group of 3 people, here's exactly what you'll do. So we'll go very fast. Presenter. So you'll pick one of you will start. You'll be the presenter. The other 2 people will be listeners. Presenter, you summarize the objectives you're going to be trying to cover. And also, you're going to discuss the strategies that you were thinking about in order to tap into those individual attributes. You're only going to have 3 minutes to do both of those things. This is not going to be deep, elegant discourse. Socrates would not be pleased. But you're going to get it on the table as fast as possible, because then you're going to give your 2 listeners 2 minutes to do some random brainstorming as fast-paced as they can, and you can't comment. They're just coming up with ideas. Well, here's what I might do. Here's what I would do in that situation. Here's what I would add. I would think about doing this. Maybe I wouldn't want to do this. Just as fast as you can. And don't censor yourself. The classic brainstorm. Don't worry if 9 of the ideas are horrible. If you get one on the table that is good, that people can learn from, that's what we're shooting for. So, presenters, you can't talk during this time, but you get 1 minute at the end to comment on anything you want to comment about. It could be one idea, or it could be the collection of ideas. You could tell people how stupid they were for coming up with those ideas. I don't care, but you've got a minute to comment and reflect out loud to the group about what you heard. So 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. If you do the calculation here, this is complex math, it'll be 6 minutes for each round. If you have 3 people in each group, it'll take us 20 minutes to do this entire thing. A lot of moving parts. Let me summarize again. After we get you in groups of 3, presenter is going to lay out your objectives, give enough contextual information, tell them about what you were just writing down for the last 6 or 7 minutes. Listeners will respond for 2 minutes and what you're thinking about doing here. Again, random brainstorm. Don't censor yourself and don't let the presenter censor you. And then the presenter will have a minute at the end. What I will do is I'm going to manage time for the entire room using timer tools. And what I will do at the beginning, I'll say go, and I'll have a 6-minute runner on. And I'll say out loud after 3 minutes, go to the listeners. And I'll say after we've gone 5 minutes, I'll say go to the presenter for a last comment. So you'll hear my voice echoing from the background, and that means you guys don't have to facilitate. No one has to manage time within the group. I'll try to just keep you focused on this. So you cannot have more than 3 people in your group. You can have 2, but I would prefer because you'll have more people to brainstorm with. So we're shooting for groups of 3 as even as we can distribute. We can't have groups of 4. Now let's just set a norm right now that it is absolutely okay for the person next to you to get up and walk away from you right now. We are not going to take that personally. We are going to honor and celebrate that they're making the best decision for them at the moment. Now if both people get up and move away, it's obviously about you. So, and you can take that personally if you want, but you still have to go get with a group of people. No, you might find there might be people who are doing similar work as you, and you've been involved in conversations, and it would be important to have them in your group. It might just be that you appreciate somebody's perspective. They have a divergent way of thinking, and they'd be a great person to do this exercise with. Or they just like somebody, or not know somebody, and you want to connect and have an opportunity. Your eyes met across the room, and you were just drawn to each other with magnetic power. Okay? You have 2 minutes to find your group of 3. You've got 2 minutes. Get up, move. You can move your chairs around. You can spread out, but you have to be close by to one another. Okay. If you just once you've designated who's going first, raise your hand as a group. Raise your hand as a group once you know who's going first. We need everybody's hand up before we can proceed. You guys know? Great. Okay. When I push start and say start, presenter, you've got 3 minutes. I'll call the time on you. You'll have 3 minutes, but you'll also be able to see the timer up here if you're not sure how much time you have remaining. Again, presenter, and this first time through, let me remind you, you're summarizing the objectives you're trying to meet. You're giving people any context, and you're talking about exactly how you thought about designing this so it meets people's individual attributes. Go.
How to use the given, resources, how to back to the past minute.
3, 2, 1. Listeners, this is your opportunity for fast-paced brainstorming, ideas you have for them, thoughts you have for them, things that they could do to better tap into individual attributes of the learners and their guidance. Go. So can I each, 12 more minutes before we go to that?
Sure.
That's
Well,
what I want.
don't mind.
Yeah. So, pardon the interruption. That was a full session. Let me go meta, not necessarily metacognitive, but meta on process here. A lot of experience trying to construct, not necessarily succeeding, but trying to construct professional dialogue in settings. My experience, I think, lines up with actually a lot of research that we have. That when you create informal opportunities for people to talk without much structure, they talk about the issues how they typically would have normally talked about the issues, which might be fine sometimes. But if there are certain things you want people to get out of a conversation, you need to think about how to structure it beyond get together in a group and chat. Because lots of things happen. You know what happened. It's not necessarily bad things, but it might not be what you want to see happen. What I wanted to have happen out of this is you had an opportunity to say out loud to someone else some of your early thinking that was kind of fuzzy. One, to make you get a little clearer about it. But two, to actually get some feedback before you feel wedded to any ideas, before you're too far down the design chute and you feel like you can't back out of it. And even if they're not necessarily great ideas, just to open up the realm of possibilities for you. So that's why I designed this particular protocol the way I did. Very simple, but think about the structure you need to give to dialogue so that it happens the way you want to do it. Bossidy and Sharon, who wrote a great book called Execution, have a line, it's my favorite line out of the book, that says, dialogue is the basic unit of work. Work gets done through dialogue. And the question is it the right work? And so when you think about professional learning and the social dynamics of learning, how do you construct those conversations? Now, let's go identify your second presenter. And go.